She was just 18. A rising star, a daughter, a dreamer. Sally Anne Bowman had her whole life ahead of her. Modeling contracts were coming in. Her name was starting to mean something. She had light. She had promise. And in a single night, all of it was taken from her. September 2005. Sally Anne returns home after a night out. It's just past midnight. She's only steps from her front door when she's attacked, stabbed. Left bleeding in the dark. But her killer wasn't done. He came back, and what he did next defies comprehension. She was violated after death. A final act of cruelty no human should endure. But what if we told you, this wasn't his first time? That the man who did this, Mark Dixie, had a long history of attacking women. A trail of violence stretching across countries. And that he had slipped through the cracks again and again, until Sally Anne paid the price. This is more than a murder. It's a story of horror hiding in plain sight. Of justice delayed, of warnings ignored, and a system that failed to protect. And it's a story you'll never forget. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe victims deserve to be heard and remembered, subscribe to our channel. Because the truth needs a voice. And we'll be here to tell it. Every week. Every case. Every silence, broken. Before her name was known across newspapers, before crime scene tape wrapped around her family home, Sally Anne Bowman was simply Sally. A lively, confident teenager with a warm smile and big dreams. She was born on September 11, 1987, in South London. The youngest of 5 sisters, Sally Anne was known for being the bright spark of the family. Her mother, Linda, described her as full of energy, someone who lit up a room the moment she walked in. She wasn't shy about her ambitions. From a young age, Sally Anne had her sights set on modeling, and unlike most teens who daydream about fame, she was already making it happen. By 18, she was already signed with a modeling agency and had appeared in national advertising campaigns. She had recently been featured in a major hair products promotion and was planning to audition for a TV talent show. Modeling wasn't just a hobby for her, it was a serious goal. And those around her believed she had the drive and the look to make it big. But beneath the rising star image, she was still a normal teenager. She lived at home in Blenheim Crescent, South Croydon, with her mother. She hung out with friends, loved music, and had a soft spot for shopping. Her sisters remembered her as cheeky and playful, sometimes mischievous, always affectionate. Her bedroom walls were decorated with pictures of her friends and magazine clippings of fashion icons she admired. Like most girls her age, she was learning who she was and where she wanted to go in life. She was also navigating young love. At the time of her death, she was dating Lewis Broston, a young man she'd been in an on-again, off-again relationship with. Their romance, like many teenage ones, had its ups and downs. Friends described them as passionate, sometimes volatile, but deeply connected. Sally Anne had recently turned 18 and was looking forward to the freedom that came with adulthood. She had just gotten her first tattoo, a small design on her back. And she spoke excitedly about going on trips, walking catwalks, and moving to London for bigger opportunities. But even as her career was beginning to take off, she remained close to home. She was deeply bonded to her family, especially her mother and sisters. Linda Bowman has often spoken publicly about how the two of them shared everything, laughs, arguments, late-night chats. Sally Anne would leave handwritten notes around the house saying, "Love you, Mom," and would often text her when out late, just to check in. It's those small memories that would later become painful reminders of a life interrupted. In her final days, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She had gone to a photo shoot the week before her death and was looking forward to a quiet weekend with Lewis. No one, not even her closest friends or family, sensed that anything was wrong. And that's part of what made her murder so terrifying. There were no warning signs. No threats. No shadow looming over her. She wasn't living a dangerous life. She wasn't involved with the wrong people. She was simply a teenage girl, stepping into the world, and someone decided to end that life. The tragedy of Sally Anne's death was not just in how she died, but in all the things she never got to do. She never got to see her face on a magazine cover. Never got to travel the world. Never got to fall in love again, grow up, or chase the future she was building for herself. And for her family, there's the unbearable knowledge that she died just feet away from home. Not in a dark alley or a distant place, but right there, on her own driveway. Her mother asleep inside. Her world still intact, until it wasn't. Sally Anne Bowman was more than a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. A young woman with everything ahead of her, until it was stolen in one violent, senseless moment. Saturday, September 24, 2005, began like any other late summer weekend. The sky over South Croydon was clear, and the cool air carried the hum of traffic and late-night chatter. For 18-year-old Sally Anne Bowman, the evening was meant to be a night out, nothing extraordinary. She had plans to meet with friends, have a few drinks, and spend time with her boyfriend, Louis Sproston. That afternoon, Sally Anne had been at home with her mother, Linda. There was nothing unusual about her mood. If anything, she seemed cheerful. She carefully picked out her outfit for the night: jeans, heels, and a cream jacket. Not over the top, but stylish, effortlessly confident, just like her. Around 9 p.m., she left home and made her way to a local restaurant where she met up with Louis. The couple had been working through a rocky patch in their relationship. Just a few days earlier, they had argued, and things between them were still tense. But tonight, they wanted to spend time together, try to smooth things over. They ate, they drank, and then headed back to Louis's flat later that evening. By 1 a.m., they were back at his place. And just before 4 a.m., an argument broke out. The details of that disagreement would later be scrutinized by police, but what's known for sure is that it ended with Sally Anne insisting she go home. Louis, perhaps frustrated or tired, didn't argue. He drove her back to Blenheim Crescent. It was 4 a.m. when his car pulled up outside her family's house. The street was empty. The quiet of the early morning hung heavy, the kind of silence that seems too still, too calm. Sally Anne got out of the car, and without waiting for him to pull away, turned toward her front door. Louis drove off. What happened next would take less than a few minutes, but would change everything. Just feet from her front step, Sally Anne was attacked. Brutally. Without warning. She was stabbed repeatedly. 7 times. The violence was swift, frenzied. Her attacker struck with overwhelming force, catching her completely off guard. One of the stab wounds pierced her heart. Another slashed through her abdomen. She didn't stand a chance. And then, in an act that shocked even hardened investigators, the killer raped her lifeless body. Her final moments were violent, terrifying, and utterly senseless. She was left there, half naked, bleeding out on the pavement. Her cream jacket soaked in red. Her home just a few feet away. Her mother still asleep inside, unaware of the horror unfolding just beyond the door. The neighborhood remained silent. No one saw or heard anything. No security cameras. No lights switching on. Just darkness, and one man's brutal instincts. When the killer walked away, he vanished into the night like a ghost. There was no screaming. No sound of struggle. Just a girl on her driveway, alone, attacked in the span of seconds. As the sky began to lighten, her body lay still. Unseen by anyone. At 10 a.m., a neighbor spotted something on the pavement. A crumpled shape near the driveway. For a moment, it didn't look real. And then, with a chill of horror, they realized what it was. A body. Panic spread. Calls were made. Police and paramedics arrived. But it was too late. Sally Anne Bowman was dead. No one knew it yet, but this was the beginning of one of the most disturbing murder investigations in recent British history. The sheer brutality. The timing. The lack of any witnesses or leads. It was every parent's nightmare, every community's worst fear. And somewhere out there, the man who had done this was still walking free. It was just after 10 a.m. on Sunday, September 25, 2005. The sun had risen, casting a soft light over the quiet suburban streets of South Croydon. Children played behind closed doors. Families prepared their Sunday routines. And outside one house on Blenheim Crescent, a silent horror was waiting to be found. A man living nearby had gone out to check on his car. As he glanced across the street, something caught his eye, something lying motionless on the pavement outside number 21. At first, he thought it was a pile of clothes. But as he got closer, a terrible realization set in. It wasn't clothing. It was a body. Sally Anne Bowman was lying on her back, partially undressed, with dried blood staining her jacket and jeans. Her blonde hair was matted. Her skin was pale. There was no sign of movement. No sign of life. The man froze in place, then ran for help. At 10:05 a.m., a frantic 999 call was made. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived. The scene was sealed off with tape. Officers moved quickly, urging neighbors to stay indoors. But word spread fast. Something terrible had happened, something that didn't belong in a quiet residential street like this. Sally Anne was pronounced dead at the scene. The wounds told their own story. Deep, violent stab marks clustered around her chest and abdomen. Her body bore signs of sexual assault. The crime was savage, calculated, and deeply personal. And yet, to the police, it made no sense. Who would do this? And why? Inside the house, her mother Linda was still unaware. It was a neighbor who broke the news. Moments later, Linda collapsed in grief. For detectives, the initial moments were crucial. Officers cordoned off the area and began canvassing nearby homes. Forensic teams were called in. Photographs were taken. Every inch of the pavement was examined. They found blood. Fibers. Hair. A broken fingernail. But no murder weapon. No footprints. No sign of forced entry into the home. And, perhaps most frustrating of all, no eyewitnesses. Blenheim Crescent was a quiet, middle-class street. People kept to themselves. The idea that someone could be murdered here, in the open, without a sound, felt impossible. And yet, it had happened. It had happened in the shadows of the early morning. While everyone else slept, a predator had struck, and disappeared. By early afternoon, crime scene tents were erected, and reporters began to arrive. News vans lined the streets. Local residents stood behind police tape, stunned and shaken. The investigation had officially begun. But at this stage, detectives had more questions than answers. Was it someone she knew? A jealous ex? A stalker? Or had she simply crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong moment? As detectives worked to identify a suspect, one thing was certain: the attack on Sally Anne Bowman was not random chaos. It was controlled. Swift. Cold. And the killer had left no obvious trace, except, perhaps, one. Something that would quietly sit in a lab for months. Something small. Invisible. But powerful enough to unlock the truth. His DNA. From the moment Sally Anne Bowman's body was discovered, the Metropolitan Police launched a full-scale murder investigation. The case was quickly assigned to the Homicide and Serious Crime Command, and every available resource was deployed. The brutality of the killing, the stabbing, the sexual assault, the location, sent a clear message: this was not a crime of passion. This was predatory. Calculated. And extremely dangerous. For detectives, the pressure was immediate and intense. The first 72 hours after a homicide are often the most crucial. Leads must be followed quickly. Witnesses interviewed. Evidence preserved. But from the start, this case presented major challenges. There were no CCTV cameras pointing directly at the Bowman house. No neighbors had heard a scream. No one had seen a struggle. And crucially, there was no clear suspect. Investigators began by building a timeline of Sally Anne's final movements. Her mother confirmed that Sally Anne had been out the previous evening with her boyfriend, Louis Broston. He was quickly brought in for questioning. Louis told police that he had driven Sally Anne home around 4 a.m. after a minor argument. He claimed she had gotten out of the car and walked toward her front door while he drove away. At first, detectives were suspicious. He had been the last known person to see her alive. Their relationship had its tensions. Could this have escalated into something fatal? But Louis cooperated fully. He gave a detailed statement, handed over his clothes, and submitted a DNA sample. Forensic testing revealed no match to the DNA found at the crime scene. His alibi was also confirmed by phone records and neighbors' testimonies. He was eventually ruled out as a suspect. With the boyfriend cleared, detectives turned their attention outward. They interviewed dozens of people, friends, ex-boyfriends, neighbors, local business owners, and anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. Flyers were distributed. The media was engaged in a nationwide appeal. A dedicated tip line was opened. But leads were few and far between. The forensic team had managed to collect a small amount of DNA from Sally Anne's body. It was a clear, single male profile, most likely the attacker's. It was uploaded into the UK's national DNA database. There was only one problem: it didn't match anyone. That fact was terrifying. It meant that whoever had killed Sally Anne had never been arrested in the UK before, or had never given a DNA sample. He wasn't in the system. He was invisible. Still, investigators worked tirelessly. Over the following weeks, they collected more than 700 voluntary DNA samples from local men. Delivery drivers. Builders. People who worked in the area or lived nearby. But none of them matched. The killer had vanished, leaving behind only silence and fear. The lack of progress took a heavy toll on the community, and on Sally Anne's family. Her mother, Linda, gave several interviews begging the public for help. Her father, Paul Bowman, expressed frustration and grief in equal measure. Months passed. The police kept working. But nothing broke the case open. And then, nearly a year later, everything changed. In June 2006, a man named Mark Dixie was arrested in another part of London after getting into a pub fight. It was a minor incident, nothing that would normally raise alarms. But under UK law, anyone arrested is required to give a DNA sample. Dixie's sample was processed and uploaded into the national DNA database. The results triggered an immediate hit. Mark Dixie's DNA matched the profile found on Sally Anne Bowman's body. The breakthrough came almost exactly 9 months after her murder. Police were stunned. A man who had never even been on their radar, a man who didn't live nearby, was suddenly at the center of one of the most high-profile murder cases in the country. Detectives moved fast. Dixie was arrested and brought in for questioning. He denied everything. Claimed he had never met Sally Anne. Then, as the evidence mounted, his story shifted. He admitted he had sex with her body, but insisted she was already dead when he found her. It was a disturbing and implausible claim. Investigators didn't buy it, and neither did prosecutors. As police dug into Dixie's background, a far more chilling picture emerged. He was not just a pub brawler. He was a career criminal with a long history of sexual violence. He had previous convictions for indecent assault, sex offenses, burglary, and armed robbery. He had lived in multiple countries, including Australia and Spain. And crucially, he had been in Croydon at the time of Sally Anne's murder. The case against him was growing by the day. And soon, it would go to court. By the time Mark Dixie stood trial in early 2008, the public already knew his name, and feared it. For nearly 3 years, the murder of Sally Anne Bowman had haunted the headlines. Now, her family sat in the courtroom, finally face to face with the man accused of destroying their lives. The trial began at the Old Bailey in February 2008. It would last several weeks and reveal the darkest, most disturbing details of what happened in the early hours of September 25, 2005. Mark Dixie, 35 years old, was charged with murder, rape, and sexual penetration of a corpse. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense? That he had not killed Sally Anne Bowman, but had stumbled upon her body after she had already been murdered. In his version of events, he had been walking home from a cocaine-fueled night out, saw her lying dead in the driveway, and, by his own words, couldn't help himself. The courtroom was stunned. Dixie claimed he had sex with her corpse but didn't harm her. It was a story so grotesque, so implausible, that it seemed designed to disturb. But his defense counsel insisted it was the truth. The prosecution, led by Brian Altman QC, laid out a devastating case. They argued that Dixie had attacked Sally Anne after she got out of her boyfriend's car. They believed he had followed her, either by chance or intent, and struck the moment Lewis drove away. The attack was sudden, brutal, and driven by violent sexual aggression. The stab wounds, 7 in total, were consistent with a frenzied assault. The nature of the injuries left no doubt. The killer intended to murder. DNA evidence was the prosecution's strongest weapon. The semen recovered from Sally Anne's body and clothing matched Mark Dixie exactly. The chances of it being someone else were 1 in a billion. But more than that, forensic analysis showed the order of events. She had been stabbed before the sexual assault, not after. Her wounds bled while she was still alive, proving she was not dead when he began to violate her. Medical experts testified that Sally Anne's heart was still beating during the assault. And the pathologist's report confirmed something chilling: the fatal wounds and the rape occurred in rapid succession. Dixie had not stumbled across a corpse. He had created one. The jury listened as the prosecution painted a picture of a man who was not just a killer, but a predator, someone with a long and troubling history. They were shown details of Dixie's past, a string of sexual offenses dating back to the 1980s, including indecent assaults, attempted rape, and attacks in both the UK and abroad. One of his previous victims had been a 15-year-old girl. Another, a woman attacked while walking home. In every case, the pattern was clear: Mark Dixie preyed on women when they were alone and vulnerable. Now, prosecutors said that violence had escalated to murder. Dixie showed little emotion during the trial. He sat, expressionless, as witness after witness dismantled his defense. His explanation, bizarre and repulsive, failed to hold up under scrutiny. There were no footprints or evidence of another attacker. No signs that anyone else had touched Sally Anne that night. It all pointed to one man. On February 22, 2008, the jury returned their verdict: guilty. Dixie was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 34 years before he would be eligible for parole. The judge, Mr. Justice Gross, called the crime depraved and savage, adding that the sexual assault on Sally Anne's body was one of the most horrific acts he had ever encountered in court. For Sally Anne's family, the verdict brought some sense of justice, but not peace. Outside the courtroom, her mother Linda said, "There is no sentence that will ever be enough. He destroyed my daughter's life. He destroyed our lives." Paul Bowman, Sally Anne's father, added, "At least now we know he can't do this to anyone else." But as the trial ended, a disturbing question lingered: had Mark Dixie done this before? With Mark Dixie behind bars, the case of Sally Anne Bowman did not fade into silence. If anything, it grew louder, echoing far beyond the courtroom, into the public conscience, the media, and the criminal justice system itself. The sheer brutality of the crime, paired with Dixie's grotesque defense, had ignited national outrage. The idea that a young woman, just 18, vibrant, full of dreams, could be murdered and violated outside her own front door was more than heartbreaking. It was terrifying. It shattered the illusion of safety. It forced uncomfortable questions. How had a man like Dixie gone unnoticed for so long? And could he have been stopped? In the days following his conviction, police publicly confirmed that Mark Dixie had an extensive criminal record. Not just in the UK, but overseas. In Australia, he had served time for a violent sexual assault. In Spain, he was wanted for questioning in another rape case. His history of predatory behavior spanned years and continents. What's more disturbing is this: had he not been arrested for a completely unrelated pub brawl in 2006, his DNA might never have entered the national database, and the murder of Sally Anne Bowman might still remain unsolved. The implications were staggering. The case sparked renewed debate about the UK's DNA retention policies. At the time, police were only allowed to retain DNA samples from convicted criminals or individuals charged with serious offences. Dixie had flown under the radar. Critics demanded reform. They argued that expanding the DNA database could prevent future tragedies, that the Bowman case was proof of its life-saving potential. Sally Anne's family became vocal advocates for change. Her father, Paul Bowman, campaigned for tougher sentencing laws and better tracking of sex offenders. He argued that the system had failed his daughter, not once, but repeatedly. Dixie, he said, should never have been free. His past made him dangerous. And yet, he was allowed to walk the streets. Linda Bowman, Sally Anne's mother, spoke often about the emotional toll. People say time heals, she told reporters. But it doesn't. It just gets harder. We still live in that house. Every day, I walk past the place where my daughter died. To this day, police believe that Sally Anne may not have been Mark Dixie's only victim. His DNA has been tested against numerous unsolved sexual assaults and homicides, both in the UK and abroad. In at least one case, a 2001 rape in South London, he was conclusively linked. But the victim, though brave, chose not to pursue charges. Her identity remains protected. Others may never be known. There's a theory, unconfirmed, but persistent, that Dixie may have murdered before. That Sally Anne's death was not an escalation, but part of a pattern that began years earlier, in countries where his crimes went unreported, uninvestigated, or unconnected. If true, it means that Sally Anne's case was not just a tragedy, it was a missed opportunity. A preventable loss. In the aftermath of the trial, there were calls to expand international criminal databases and improve communication between law enforcement agencies across borders. Dixie had traveled freely. Had been arrested in different countries. Had served short sentences, and disappeared. If his information had been properly shared between nations, he may never have walked the streets of South London again. There were also renewed debates around the UK's DNA database and the laws governing it. In 2006, a government review began to assess whether all arrested individuals, not just those convicted, should have their DNA retained. Civil liberties groups opposed the idea, warning of overreach. But for the Bowman family, the issue wasn't theoretical. It was personal. If his DNA had been in the system earlier, Linda Bowman said in an interview, my daughter might still be alive. Their grief became advocacy. In the years that followed, the Bowman family supported various campaigns for victims' rights, tougher sentences for sex offenders, and better victim support services. Sally Anne's name was often cited in Parliament during debates about criminal justice reform. But beyond politics, there was always the personal loss. Paul Bowman, her father, once described walking into her bedroom after the funeral and sitting on her unmade bed. The clothes she'd worn were still hanging behind the door. Her makeup sat untouched. Her mobile phone charger was still plugged into the wall. You expect them to walk back in, he said. But they don't. For Linda, the pain was even more raw. She had not just lost a daughter. She had found her body. She had stood in the place where her child had bled to death. The psychological toll was immense. In interviews, she spoke of sleepless nights, of flashbacks, of rage. "You don't get over something like that," she said. "You carry it." Despite everything, the family chose not to move away. The house on Blenheim Crescent, for all its associations with horror, was still home. It was where Sally Anne had grown up, where she'd laughed, taken selfies, and dreamed out loud. To abandon it would be to lose another piece of her. The community, once shaken, also tried to heal. In the years since the murder, neighbors organized vigils. Floral tributes were laid at the foot of the driveway where Sally Anne had fallen. On anniversaries, candles were lit in her memory. Her name became a quiet, persistent reminder of what had been lost, and of the predator who had walked among them. Today, Mark Dixie remains in prison, serving a life sentence. He will be eligible for parole in 2040, but few believe he will ever be released. His lack of remorse, combined with his history, marks him as a permanent threat. Sally Anne's story has been told and retold, on television, in books, in newspaper specials. But beneath the media attention lies a deeper, quieter truth. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. Not just a name in a headline. Her dreams were real. Her life mattered. In the final analysis, justice was served, but only after unimaginable pain. The legacy of her case is layered. It exposed cracks in the system, reshaped parts of policy, and awakened the country to the dangers of serial offenders slipping through the gaps. It reminded us that beneath the surface of ordinary streets, darkness can lurk. That monsters do not always wear masks. Sometimes, they wear the face of a stranger at the pub. A man walking home. A name that means nothing, until it means everything. And so, the question remains, quiet but unyielding, if not for that pub fight, would we have ever known his name?